Alright, welcome back as we continue discussing the cloth system here within Unity. Now, what you got up next for us, Lee?
Well, we're going to deal with tearing of our cloth this time around. So what we're going to do is create another cloth system. So we're going to start off with an empty game object. I'll rename this one to sheet. And let's go ahead and go to physics, grab another cloth renderer. Then I'll throw it all in there for us. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select our sheet. So that gives us our sheet. And for this one, I want to use the red material, the same two-sided material that I used for the flag, which completely disappeared on me again. So let's go back to sheet. And let's see if I can't get this to play nicely this time. So we'll go to materials, and I'll just drag it over here this time.
There you go.
So now we have our sheet.
Okay.
So, now I want to position this kind of low to the ground. And let me get this right where I want it to be, right about here. The reason why I'm going to put it here is going to be apparent fairly shortly.
All right.
Now,
just take your word for it then.
We need to constrain it because this is going to be a cloth, and just like all other cloths, if we don't have an attached collider to it, it's just going to fall to the ground, which is not what I want. So to do that, I'm going to make a duplicate of one of these attach points. So I'll hit Control-C, or sorry, Control-D, duplicate it, drag it down, and I'm going to parent it into our sheet. So go ahead and name this one. Well, I'll leave it attach point 1. That'll be fine. But I'm going to duplicate it 3 more times because I want 4 of them.
1 for each corner, I imagine.
Now, to get it fairly close, well, here, let me do it this way. Because they're way up there on top of the flagpole, let me reposition 1 first.
Yeah, that'd probably be
and
best.
then I'll duplicate it after I've got it a lot closer to where I need it to be.
Hey, look, there it is.
All right, so now go ahead and move this up to the top. Now, once again, the important thing with your attached colliders is that they must intersect with vertices of your cloth. So they have to contain some vertices inside of them for them to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this guy out to be right about the size of the entire sheet. So now I've got that one. I'm going to duplicate it, rename this to B2, and I'm going to move it down to the bottom.
Now, are you going to do this instead of using the 4 corners?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the reason why is because of the way the calculations work. If you're only attached at the 4 corners, you're going to sag in the middle, and you're going to have all that strain at those 4 corner points, and that's going to be very likely to tear away from those corners before you tear through the center. So with that duplicated, I'm going to take this one, duplicate it again, and I'm going to move it to about the center of the object, so right about here. I'm also going to adjust its Z scale back to 1, and I'm going to scale it in Y. So let's go ahead and scale it up. Now, I don't want it to interpenetrate with the other corner, so I'm going to leave it just a tad shy.
Now, what's the purpose of this guy?
He's going to constrain.
You're going to be constraining the sides instead of the corners.
Yep. I'm constraining all the sides.
All right.
So with that in place, I'm going to rename him to be 3. Duplicate this one. Name this one 4, and then I'm going to reposition this one to the other side. So now if I select the sheet, should be constrained on all sides. But 3 and 4 look a little bit low, so I'm going to move them up just a tad. So now everything should be constrained, and no vertices are being controlled by any 2 objects. So now with my interactive cloth, I need to come down to our attach points, And I'm going to set our size of our array to 4. This will give me 4 elements. Attach point 1, attach point 2, expand out the other ones, attach point 3, and attach point 4. So if I go ahead and play, you'll see our cloth doesn't even move. It just kind of hangs there.
Kind of like a wall.
Which is exactly what we want. We want it to just stay there.
Okay.
Now, this is where the fun begins. So we want to be able to tear it. So to tear it, let's play with our cube. Let's move it a little bit towards the backside of the ball.
Okay.
So when it bounces,
it should bounce forward toward the flag or toward the sheet there. There you go.
So notice the sheet moved,
yeah,
but it didn't tear.
It's like it passed right through it.
So what we're going to do is, because this sheet doesn't impart any energy to the cube, it can't stop it. So eventually it's just going to pass through. Now, for sake of argument, we could take this and we could impart some energy to it. Let's say like 0.5. You know, if we hit play, so now it should bounce, it hits, and then bounces off.
Yeah, very nice.
So, but that's a little bit too much energy. So I'm going to drop it down to 0.1 and try it again. Because I want it to look like it's got a lot of give. But what happens now is, if I come in here to our tear factor, if with tear factor set to 0, that means it's not going to tear.
Okay.
I want to leave that for now.
All right.
I just wanted to point it out. What I do want to do is take our attach points and I'm going to make them tearable.
All right.
Which means we can tear our cloth away from our points.
Okay.
Now this attachment tear factor is how much energy needs to go in to tear, or how far the vertices need to stretch before they tear away.
Right.
So if we hit play now, not enough.
Right.
So if I stop and I take this and I dial down this number,
and this should pull it away from its 4 supports.
Right. Just like that.
Like so. And it wasn't perfect, but you can see it did rip some of those away.
Right. And pretty much got all of it except a little bit here and this one corner up at the top. So it did manage to pull most of it away.
Gotcha.
So that is what Tearable checkboxes do for our attach colliders, and that's what the attach tear factor is doing. Now the attachment response is supposed to be how much imparts back into our attachment colliders to move them along with the object. But because there's no real object for them to move, you're not going to see it, so it's kind of hard to notice. So.
Okay. Yeah, I gotcha.
But what I'm going to do now is I don't want it to tear away from the edges. I want it to hold steady. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back to our default of 0.5. What I do want to happen is I want the cloth itself to tear. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dial up some sort of tear factor in here. Now this number is going to determine how easily the cloth tears. Basically, again, how far the vertices need to stretch before they tear. So let's go ahead and we'll start with 0.5. And go ahead and play the simulation and we see what happens. So it starts to tear.
Yeah, it tore a hole, but it wasn't big enough for the object to actually make it through.
Right. Because it has some ability to resist the object from going through, there wasn't enough tearing to tear a hole all the way through. So we've got 2 options to handle that. We can take our collision response and dial it down, which means it's not going to resist the object as much, or we can take our tear factor and dial that down. So let's go ahead and dial it down roughly by half again. So if I play again, now we tear a bigger hole through it.
Oh yeah, seriously.
So now we've got some serious damage to our cloth.
Now, how is that tear working? Is it tearing along those edges of the actual polygon surface?
Right. It's ripping apart the vertices. So what it does is it calculates the vertices and then rips them apart and basically turns them into their own renderable meshes.
Gotcha. And it looks very nice, but it does kind of bring up an interesting point that if you're bringing in a mesh that has very regular edges, you will get some really regularly shaped holes where you can actually kind of make out horizontal and vertical grid lines.
Right. If we get close enough to this, and I select on it, you can see exactly how it's tearing.
Very nice.
So, and again, this is all trial and error to get the effect that you're looking for. So, but that shows all of the settings of the interactive cloth. What we haven't covered yet, though, are the settings of the cloth render. Now, these are pretty much just like any other renderer that we've seen, whether or not it can cast a shadow. So if I turn this off, if I move around here, we can see the shadow. So is it casting a shadow? Also, whether or not it's receiving a shadow.
I think you can see some lower right-hand corner there from the ball, but...
Well, I think I can still move the ball. No, hold on. Nope, it's not going to let me move the ball. So if I stop it, now I can see it. So I can go over here, and is it going... So it's going to stop casting, but it's not going to stop receiving shadows. So it looks like that functionality isn't enabled with this shader.
No problem.
But we can turn off whether or not it casts. Materials, again, this is an array that we can set up of what material is applied to our shader. We just have one. We're not going to layer stuff on. Now, the other important setting is pause when not visible. That's controlling whether or not these animations are running when we're looking at the object or not.
Right. If we were to look away from this cloth, it would stop calculating and basically stop moving altogether.
Right. But we can't show it because we have to look at it.
Exactly. It's one of those things where, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, does it make a sound? If a flag is flapping and no one's looking at it, does it still flap? Right.
But it comes in handy if, for some reason, you were recreating Venice with all the pendants and flags and banners all over the place. You don't want to render and simulate all that cloth that's not being seen.
Right.
So this is a very important setting to have.
All right.
So that is all the settings of interactive cloth and the cloth render, which is everything I wanted to cover in this introductory set of videos over cloth.
And it does make a nice introduction to cloth systems in general. Of course, if you want to work with cloth more on your own and explore it further, you've now got some great artillery to get in and start doing some really cool projects of your own. But that is going to wrap up this entire section over the physics system inside of Unity. And thank you very much for watching.